Our next program follows in just a few minutes. In the meantime, let's enjoy some music.
Tonight, after the 7:30 report, Susan Hampshire stars in the final episode of Leaving. At 8:30, Australian comedy with The D-Generation. At 9, the young ones take on A Killer Sock. At 9:35, current affairs with the Carlton Walsh Report. Great viewing tonight on ABC.
That the roots of the music are in the earth.
What I have discovered out here is how important it is for these people, the Kennedy people, to be living on their own land.
Maybe I'm just a character that lives in two worlds, you know, one which is bush and relaxed, and the other which is city and music.
Musician Charlie McMahon, Australia's foremost didgeridoo player, and an individual with a big commitment to the establishment of Aboriginal settlements. The Gondwana Land Project, in a big country, 8 o'clock Thursday.
In 1968, the haunting landscape of Lake Mungo in western New South Wales became centre stage for a discovery that would rewrite not only Australian, but world prehistory.
Over the past 20 years, stunning archaeological finds have suggested that the Aborigines were at one time in human history the most modern and advanced people on Earth.
We will never know when the first footprint was made on an Australian beach. But what has been established through the findings of archaeology has rewritten human history and drawn a new picture of a dynamic and highly adaptive people whose art, religion and social organizations were very sophisticated and whose ingenuity and technological skills enabled them to survive in one of the most inhospitable countries in the world.
Out of Darkness, next in Discovery, 8 o'clock Saturday on ABC.
Hello, welcome to this week's edition of The Investigators. Tonight, are the electrical fittings in your home in danger of turning into this and taking the whole house with them?
The big number plate buying boom that could cost you thousands just to keep the ones you've got now.
And we'll meet, sort of, the man who's selling for $20 a bottle these diet capsules that contain soya flour, milk sugar and just a touch of curry powder.
If you ever need to use a parachute in an emergency, it could be all that stands between you and your maker. So imagine the feeling when you pull the ripcord and nothing happens. The ground's rushing up, you're in big trouble. Well, it did happen to 65-year-old Ian McClymont from Marungal Station in northwest Queensland. And he lived to talk about it and to go after the parachute distributors for compensation. Ian's flown his own plane for the past 25 years without incident. But when his son Malcolm bought a two-seater Drifter Ultralight, he flew it for 40 hours and found it was more manoeuvrable and gave better visibility during mustering than his own plane. Mustering with a light aircraft's a necessity in large Queensland stations. So Ian, he's the one with the walking stick, also brought a drifter in early '84 from the Ostflight company in Ballina. It was a similar model to this one, which belongs to neighbour Peter Harrington, and it cost $12,000. Because it couldn't be insured in flight, Ian McClymont was interested when Ostflight sent him a brochure on the ballistic recovery system. It's a parachute packed in a cylinder and fired by 2 cartridges. Mounted on the frame of an ultralight, it can have a parachute up in 1.5 seconds. Important for machines which are not allowed to fly above 500 feet. He spends a great deal of time mustering over timbered country where forced landings could be difficult, to say the least, so Ian McClymont believed this was the answer.
It's impossible to get insurance from any regular company for ultralights in flight. You can insure them on the ground, but not in flight. So the only way to insure it is in flight is some sort of a parachute that will lower the aircraft and the pilot to the ground without damaging either.
Ian paid $1,200 for the chute, and a gentleman named John Hurd from Ballina installed it for him.
One of their employees, I believe to be their employees, brought it up and installed it, and I flew it quite happily for over 100 hours, believing that if I needed, all I had to do was pull the cord and I'd have a 30-foot parachute that would open in 1.5 seconds and lower me to the ground without doing any damage.
The test came one day last year when the drifter's propeller shaft broke while Ian was out mustering cattle over scrubland.
So there were 4 men on the ground and I was bringing the cattle into them, and I had about 5 or 6 head of cattle coming in and I lost them. Normally you sit up at 300 or 400 feet, but I lost them, so I came down over this bit heavier timbered place to try and find them, and at 100 feet the propeller came off, took off, and I switched the motor off.
It was obviously time for the parachute. Ian McClymont pulled the ripcord, nothing happened. He tried again, it still wouldn't fire. By this time the ultralight was at treetop level.
Stalled 25 to 30 feet and hit the ground almost vertical, the nose first, and of course my feet were both up right in here, the 2 rudders, one on either side there, and my left foot became jammed in the works, and when the chassis bent in 2 or 3 places, as you'll see from the photo, and I had a lot of difficulty getting my foot out of the business, and it was just in the wrong place. I broke a bone across my ankle and strained everything in the foot.
He was lucky to survive. After 3 weeks in hospital and 3 more months on crutches, he believes he'll be lame for the rest of his life. Amazingly, he was quite philosophical about the propeller falling off. It's done that before. But what about the parachute, which didn't open?
On the ground at the crash site, my eldest son, Angus, was there. He is 6'6" and 17 stone and a very strong young man. I said, see if you can fire that thing. And he put both hands and planted his feet, and he could not get it to fire.
Ian McClymont believed his accident was caused through no fault of his own. He wanted compensation and wrote to Ostflight through his lawyers asking for $5,000 for personal injury and for the parachute to be repaired. He held the company responsible as they'd sold him the parachute, and he believed that one of their employees had installed it. No, said Ostflight to the personal injury claim, and they informed Mr McClymont that John Hurd was just contracted by the company as a flying instructor when he installed the chute. He was not an employee. The machine and the parachute were sent to the factory for repair, but the ultralight was too badly damaged.
We sent it back down to Ostflight at Ballina, believing that the plane could be done up, or at least a lot of the parts would be usable. They say no. They offered me $1,000 for the whole thing. The engine, of course, is unharmed and in very good order, and worth $2,000 or $3,000 new, so it should have been worth a lot more. But they accept our responsibility. They sold me the parachute, and I believed that it would work.
Jim Fenton of Ostflight says the American company which makes the parachute has agreed to replace the damaged components. When we asked if he'd consider compensating Ian McClymont, Mr Fenton said he'd need a lot more evidence before he'd think of doing so through a reduction in the price of a new ultralight. And that's what he wants, to get back up in the air.
How do we know what happened? I have no idea, other than the obvious thing that the pin may not have been removed.
If Mr. McClymont could assure you that it had and that everything was done correctly and he'd kept his aircraft correctly, would you then consider compensation?
We would certainly, yes, we would certainly look at it, yeah.
It all hinges around this little tab. Can Ian McClymont prove that this and the pin it's usually attached to weren't in the parachute canister when he had his accident? It's kept in when the craft's on the ground to stop the chute from firing. He says, yes, it was removed before the flight. And the craft itself was well maintained and kept in a hangar. But months after the event, it could be very difficult for him to prove, and his word, it seems, is not enough. There are also further complications. The Department of Aviation tells us that a two-seater ultralight is illegal. In fact, the first legal two-seater was unveiled in New South Wales last Sunday. Two-seaters must be structurally tested and formally approved by the Department of Aviation. The Drifter hasn't been. This means that anyone flying one is doing so illegally and could be fined up to $2,000. Even though, as in Ian McClymont's case, they don't know they're breaking the law. Ignorance is no defence. But the department says that Ostflight and other companies selling the craft are not breaking the law. It's perfectly legal to sell them, but illegal to use the unapproved two-seaters. This was a car, it wouldn't get near the road. But the ultralight industry has mushroomed in recent years. The Department of Aviation's attempts to bring some sort of order to the scene can only be applauded. But it would seem that they're well overdue and there's a long way to go.
An old house in the Melbourne suburb of Lilydale. A single faulty connection anywhere, or just old wiring that finally gives up. And in minutes, this can be the result. This is an exercise to illustrate how fast those old houses can burn and how difficult the fires are to fight. But every year in Melbourne alone, over 1,000 real fires are started by electrical faults. Last year, 17 people died in that one city as a result of electrical accidents. Probably every one of them could have been prevented, but we never think it could happen to us. Faulty appliances, plugs wrongly wired, frayed or broken cords. These samples all started fires in homes. Problems out of sight and out of mind until the worst happens. It's quite common for people to spend $4,000 or $5,000 on home improvements immediately after they move in, but it's hardly ever on the wiring. Yet a simple $25 inspection could discover 1,000 faults. This is a report of a 5-month study of Melbourne houses by the Royal Australian Institute of Architects Advisory Service, Archicentre, and Melbourne University. The study showed that almost 1 in 5 of the 2,676 homes surveyed had faulty electrical installations. More than a quarter of the houses between 30 and 50 years old were likely to have potentially dangerous electrical faults. The most common problems? Defective earthing, perished insulation, and illegal home handyman wiring. This house for sale is about 50 years old, so it's quite likely to have electrical faults. So the prospective buyer has asked Archicentre to do a pre-purchase inspection to look particularly at the wiring work. What's the condition of the wiring in this house?
Well, really, it's quite unsafe because it looks okay now. As soon as you pick this up, you can find 2 bare wires. That I'm not game to touch them now, but it's quite likely that these are, could be live, and if they were crossed at all or came into contact with moisture was there, the place could ignite and the roof could catch fire and the place burn down. An electrician, a qualified electrician, needs to come and check this whole house out, and particularly get rid of this loose wiring, have it all properly